Productive Disruption is a podcast presented by Rhodes Branding, spotlighting bold and innovative ideas that have the ability to reshape K-12 education. If you're looking for actionable ideas about how to operate and innovate your school, you've come to the right place. Let's get started.
Welcome to another episode of Productive Disruption. I'm your host, Molly McGowan-Gorsuch, and I'm the Director of Client Engagement at Rhodes Branding. On this episode, we're talking to K-12 and university partners in Minnesota about an innovative teacher residency program that's not only filling the district's teacher pipeline with qualified homegrown educators, it's also strengthening the workforce by recruiting diverse and bilingual candidates. Joining me today are Channing Jones from Minneapolis Public Schools, administrator of the Minneapolis and St. Thomas Teacher Residency Program, and Dr. Shelley Neilsen Gatti, associate professor of special education at the University of St. Thomas. Channing and Shelley, thank you guys so much for joining me today. So I definitely want to go into this program's origin story, but first, Channing, can you lay it out for us? Like, how does this program work to fill the Minneapolis Public Schools teacher pipeline? And I do believe it is designed for existing staff, right?
It is. It's a grow your own program. So we are specifically looking at some of our unlicensed staff that are already working with our students. So that could be ESPs, which is the educational assistants in the buildings. And it could be also employees of our community partners who work with our students already. And the program allows them to get their teaching license in either elementary education or special education, K-12, in an accelerated format. So it's a 15-month program where they would start, if they're accepted to the program, they start in spring. So our folks just started in spring of 2024 taking classes. And they, over the 15 months, they co-teach with a licensed teacher in the district, gradually taking on more responsibility. So it's that full year of student teaching, essentially, which has been found to be beneficial for student educators as they figure out, what it's really like over the course of the year. And 4 days a week, they're in that classroom with that licensed teacher. And 1 day a week, they go to St. Thomas campus to take that master's level coursework. Which is a big load. It's a big course load and it's a lot of teaching, but studies have shown that it's a really successful model for getting teachers ready. And we've had a lot of success and a lot of interest in the program from the folks that are already in the buildings with our kids.
That's awesome. And I understand, do they get paid while they're in this program?
They do, and that's a huge incentive because most folks are going back to school and then they have to pay money to do their student teaching. And that's a huge barrier for a lot of our would-be educators. So the way that a residency works is that they do make either a salary or a stipend while they're in the program so they can sustain themselves. A lot of our folks are either career changers or they've come into education late. We definitely have a wide variety of ages, people with families. And so it's a big burden for folks to look at going in a traditional model. So making a salary at the same time, they're working hard, they deserve a salary, and we're lucky enough to have the resources to be able to provide them with that.
So now, Dr. Gatti, I understand that you were the driving force behind the creation of this particular St. Thomas teacher residency back in 2017. Can you give us a brief history on how this all started for Minneapolis Public Schools and how it's really changed or expanded in the past 8 years?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Well, Channing described the model, and while I have been part of the residency since the beginning, I didn't do it alone. We've been able to work with some amazing leaders in both Minneapolis and St. Thomas to help us to create and sustain this residency model. It started with a conversation with a staff member in Minneapolis who was working in HR. And she reached out and said, geez, we'd really like to have your student teachers be placed at Minneapolis schools so then we could potentially hire them as teachers. And I said, well, you're recruiting them too late because, as you know, there's a significant shortage of teachers, and especially in special education. And that isn't a new thing. That's been around probably since the beginning of special education. It's ebbed and flowed over time, but it's pretty significant. Where every district in the state of Minnesota right now is their data shows that they're having teacher shortages, especially in special education. And so the staff member and I started to talk a little bit about, well, how could they recruit candidates earlier and not wait until they were student teaching. Minneapolis Public Schools had a very strong leader who was directing the HR department, a really visionary leader, and she started Teacher Residency in Minneapolis schools with an elementary program, partnering with another IHE. About the same time, we were also partnering with St. Paul Public Schools to develop a teacher residency in special education and elementary education, in collaboration and consultation with the National Center for Teacher Residency. So there are lots of people in the role in this development. In August of 2016, Minneapolis reached out to IHEs and invited IHEs, Institutes of Higher Education, to submit a proposal to partner with them to create, at the time, a special education teacher residency. And so our team at St. Thomas rolled up our sleeves and wrote a proposal, and we were selected from Minneapolis schools. Since that time, we did a lot of planning, some facilitated meetings around what is our mission, what do we want this to do, how do we want to work together. And then we started recruiting in about January of 2017 and launched the first cohort of 15 residents, all in special education, in May, June of 2017. Of those 15 residents, I just did some data around that. Nearly 80% are still in education. And I think Channing will share a little bit about some highlights of our graduates and some of the things they're doing in leadership roles and other teacher leadership opportunities. Since that time, in terms of how has it changed, I think we've learned a lot. We have gathered every semester, we gather feedback from our residents about what are they satisfied with, what are we missing, what do we need to change or revise. And we have been, I think, relatively fluid and flexible in using that feedback to improve the program over time. We also try to keep a district-centered model. And so while we are an IHE and we're preparing districts across the state, students in districts across the state for this particular program, we work closely with Minneapolis, and we have adjunct professors who work in Minneapolis schools that serve as instructors. That helps us to keep that district serving model. We also, when they do the year-long student teaching experience, they have we call it a university supervisor, and it's somebody that's out in the classrooms working with their cooperating teacher and the resident, coaching and mentoring along the way. Those individuals are either retired teachers or employees in Minneapolis schools, another way to keep the focus on the district. And then the other thing that we've done is we've taken the Minneapolis teacher evaluation instrument and incorporated that in our evaluation as well as in some of our teacher preparation programming, so that when they're new teachers, that's not the first time they've seen that they've received feedback and coaching using that same evaluation system from the very beginning. I know we're going to talk about partnership in a little bit, but those are some of the ways that I think we've grown. We also added elementary as a licensure area. So while we started in special education 3 years ago, we also added elementary. So as we're recruiting, we can recruit for individuals who want to teach one or the other.
Well, I'm assuming that was based on, the need or the desires of your candidates. Is that something that they were coming to you saying we would like to pursue elementary ed?
Yeah, we've definitely heard, some folks are really, they're dedicated to special education, but we also recognize it's not for everybody. It takes a special educator to work in special education. And so we were definitely hearing from folks who are interested in the license that elementary was a strong interest level. And then we finally got to the point in Minneapolis where we did notice that we were having a gap. As Shelley mentioned, that special education is one of the highest needs. And for a while, Minneapolis didn't have as high of a need with elementary school teachers. But over the past few years, that's changed. And so it makes sense to add that licensure area when we know we're going to have a need for the teachers in Minneapolis. We want to to prepare the teachers, but we want to keep them as much as possible. So knowing that we need elementary was the perfect time to add that licensure area in. And we've gotten great responses from for folks wanting to pursue that license.
So like you said, it is kind of flexible. If, the need arises, is it kind of scalable where you could add in a different, another option, if like people want to just pursue middle or high school education? I don't know. Is that something you have thought about?
It's definitely been talked about. We really want to, we think about what the gaps, and we also think about what our potential candidates want. There's a lot of moving pieces when we look to add in different licensure areas. So, for example, math and science are a huge need, but there's a lot of specific classes you need to be a math or a science teacher. And so it's something that we do discuss regularly and start to think about how could that work in a cohort model, because our residents, they take certain classes together, even if they have different licensure pathways. And we found that a cohort model is really beneficial for helping folks get through this rigorous 15 months. And so figuring out how we could add potentially another licensure area, but still keep that cohort model and really have folks have a group that they can rely on. I think that's the ultimate goal, since we just added elementary. And I don't know if we're ready for a new licensure area right away, but I do think that, we respond to the needs and the desires of the people who are a part of the district. So we'll see.
Awesome. Well, knowing that, obviously it has to be funded somehow. How is this program funded? And what kind of support does it receive from the community, if any?
Yeah, we're really lucky in our funding. So when we talk about the salaries that the residents receive, Minneapolis, the district has been able to commit funding for their salaries. We know that other residency programs across the country have to seek external funding just to pay their residents. But as Shelley said, we had such a strong leader who wanted to start this program, and this strong leadership has continued even with the movement of different staff members. There's a great commitment to grow your own programs in Minneapolis. So Minneapolis has dedicated funding, internal funding, to pay the salaries of our residents. So that really opens us up when we are seeking external funding to use it for things like tuition support. And St. Thomas has been, both Minneapolis and St. Thomas have been successful in finding some of the outside support. So one of the biggest levels, well, we have a couple of different grants, but one of the big ones in Minnesota is the Minnesota Department of Education has a Grow Your Own Teacher grant, or more than one, actually. And we have been really successful in applying for and receiving these grants. And that money has been able to go directly to support tuition. The grant does have a stipulation on it that 80% should go to BIPOC residents and 20% should go to those who identify as white. And so we've been able to do a lot for tuition support. We wanted to know that we could do as much as possible. So St. Thomas was able to find an additional grant to help balance out some of that finances for all of our residents. We have a bit of equity across the board. Shelley, did you want to share a bit about the seed grant?
Yeah, so I think this is a really important question about finances, and probably one that keeps many people awake at night, because of the importance of sustaining effective programming. And the other piece I'll just add is we know that everybody in our community and in our state and in our nation benefits from having an effective teacher and effective teachers through the child's education program. And so because of that, we all have a stake in the game. We all need to contribute. Many of us, as when we became teachers, paid for it out of our own pocket, whether that was through loans or scholarships or family money. Most of us paid for it out of our own pocket. Well, we know that we probably can't do that anymore, that we need, because of the contribution to society that teachers make, we all need to step up and provide contribution. And so when I think about our program and the financial support, it's a little bit complicated because we have a variety of financial support, and we refer to it as braided funding. And sometimes it gets beyond my level of math. But so Channing talked about that the district is contributing. They are using their budget money to contribute to the residents. They're investing in their employees to become effective teachers for the community of Minneapolis. They've also invested in staff like Channing to help to administer and support and mentor and advocate for the program. At St. Thomas, we also recognize that while we benefit from these programs in terms of tuition, we also have a stake in it, and we also contribute. So a part of my salary is 50% of my salary is paid for from St. Thomas, and that allows me to work with residency. Also, as we design the program back in our beginning stages of designing the program, we knew that there were 3 big barriers to becoming a teacher: finances, absolutely, time, and then racial isolation. And so as we designed this program, we wanted to address those barriers. And so with the finance piece, again, Minneapolis Schools has done a really great job of figuring out how to fund it and sustain that money over time. The state has contributed through that Grow Your Own that's supporting tuition and sometimes stipends. We also have another state grant through the Minnesota Residency Grant that is supporting some tuition and some other professional development and other resources around teacher residency. So those are our main state sources. And I always tell our students that it's policy drives that we do every day. And it's really important to understand who you're voting for and the things that they support. In addition, we have 2 fairly large federal grants. We have a teacher quality partnership grant that's headed into its 5th year. That supports some stipends as well as some induction support for our graduates. And then we most recently received also a federal SEED grant supporting effective educator development SEED grant, and that it also provides some tuition support. And it's going to help us with some curriculum revisions and alignment and some other things around that. So those are our federal grants. And then along the way, we've also had foundation grants. Again, foundations recognize the importance of effective teachers and the impact of lack of teachers. And so we've had Minneapolis Foundation is one through the National Center for Teacher Residencies. We've had 6 years of funding through the Black Educator Initiative grant. We've worked through NCTR for some other foundation grants too. So it gets a little complicated, and we are, again, always recognizing the significant financial barrier and how do we overcome that with our residents.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly to your point about those 3 main barriers, right? The time, and I think we've talked about even in employers in any kind of company or organization, providing the time during the workday to learn more and become better in your craft, like that's being addressed for these educators. But then also, again, the barrier of finances. So this accelerated pathway is definitely breaking some barriers. What kind of impact have you guys seen, whether that's if you've got some data points to share or just some personal stories that I know you said you've got some coming from your district. I'd love to hear those.
Yeah, so thinking about just kind of some of the numbers kind of thing. Yeah, as we said, this is now our 8th cohort, and our cohorts have varied from, typically it was 15 folks, and now we're bumping up since we've added that elementary, and so we have 20 this year. And I think when we did the math, we looked at, including this current cohort, we've recruited and accepted 122 people over the past 8 years. And of the 7 cohorts that have graduated, we've got, we said about 102 that have completed the program and entered Minneapolis public schools. I think, from that, Shelley mentioned from that first cohort, that first group of people who started in 2017 or 2016, the vast majority are still in education. And what's been really cool is that we've seen our folks move into leadership positions as well. So we have multiple graduates who have gotten their administrative licenses. And one of the things we really love doing is if a graduate has, once they got 3 years under their belt in the district, they can become a host teacher, which in the district we call them cooperating teachers. So we've had now multiple graduates then host a resident for the year, which is amazing because they really know what the resident has been going through. They know what was helpful for them as a resident. They know what maybe they wanted from their cooperating teacher when they were a resident. And it also just gives them an opportunity to get more under their belt as far as leadership roles. We know a lot of our folks have been, selected for things like the equity committees and teams. And then, St. Thomas has done a great job at offering opportunities to attend things like conferences, education conferences, which then equips our graduates and current residents with just some more tools and some more experience to continue that pathway, not only to become a better teacher in the classroom, but potentially to move into more administrative or leadership roles. And we've been lucky enough that since we are Grow Your Own, our folks want to stay in Minneapolis most of the time. We do have movement, as any district does. But in general, I think it is pretty significant that we are doing a Grow Your Own because they know our kids, they know our district, they want to be here. So I think that we're really lucky in that we've seen the demographics of Minneapolis gradually shift and change as we become more diverse. And this program is one of the biggest driving forces when it comes to that, because we're specifically seeking that out whenever possible.
I will just add to that the national data suggests that 50% of teachers, special education teachers, leave after 3 years of teaching, and so that's a pretty high or low retention rate. And within our program, we track from the very beginning whether they're still teaching in Minneapolis, whether they're still teaching somewhere in the community or in the state, or if they've left education. And as Channing said, and I always look at that starting that 4th year of teaching as being a pretty significant year. We looked at that data, and it looks like of our cohort that started their 4th year of teaching in the fall of 2023, 86% of them are still in education. Not all in Minneapolis, but 86% are in education, which is way exceeds that 50% of teachers continuing to teach after 3 years. And so, and then after 5 years, that's another, if we keep them after 5 years, they're likely to stay in education. And some of those things that Channing mentioned in terms of those teacher leadership opportunities, including the professional development, that's another investment in their retention in the district and in education. And so we see those opportunities as a way to keep them in education, because we want, the other thing is that we know that the longer teachers stay, that usually the more effective they are as teachers. And so teachers really don't get there. 5 years is a really important time for teachers, and that they can kind of take off from there. So there's so many skill sets that are required to be an effective teacher. So to get them all practicing and getting momentum around those, it takes some time.
And I think that's what I love about this program is not just obviously focusing on that entry point. And to your point, Shelley, saying you had to start earlier, had to convince the folks in the HR department they're coming behind on the 8 ball there. That you're following that journey and providing those touch points and those clear pieces in order to retain them. These career advancing opportunities. So knowing that and knowing like what's ahead, how are you seeking out these candidates, or how are they being encouraged to apply for the program? Is it like a referral process, or how does that work?
So it's kind of a who's interested to start. So again, the benefit of the Grow Your Own is that I can send out mass emails, just like first to all of our the ESPs, the support staff, just to say, here's the program we have. A little blurb. If you're interested, fill out this what we call an inquiry form. So that's our first kind of touch to, just at the beginning of the year, sending that out. Over the course of the year, we do information sessions online where we just advertise them, again, via email and on our website. And we get a chance to, connect with folks online for, maybe 45 minutes, and they can ask all their questions. We give an overview in depth. One of our biggest recruiters is folks who've been through the program. So either people that have graduated, people that have hosted before, so the cooperating teachers, principals at sites where we've been and where they've hired our residents. So that's another big thing I do is I send out kind of a mass email to basically everyone who I have on my list who's participated and said, do you know someone who fits this bill who is interested in being an educator? Send them my way, tell them about this information session. Here's a link that you can send them. And that's one of the biggest driving forces that we find in getting folks. And I think it's helpful for them, for someone who's interested in the program, to talk to somebody who really knows about it. It's one thing to talk to Shelley and I and hear the ins and outs, but to speak with somebody who's been through it, or to speak with a licensed teacher who supported a resident through it, you get a better feel for it because it is rigorous. And we know that over the course of people showing interest, some folks always drop off. So, potentially, for last year, for example, I had somewhere like 80 something inquiry forms. And I do all the follow-up with all those people. And there's definitely personal touches because it can be overwhelming. But we finally, they have to submit an application and all these things that we need from them. And then from there, we have what we call selection night, which is an event where everybody is invited who got us all the materials and officially applied. And we invite folks from Minneapolis and St. Thomas to be screeners. And we try to get as many people as we can because we don't want it to just be Shelley and I choosing a cohort of 15 to 20 people. Because we know that, if we get multiple eyes on them and if we also give them multiple opportunities within the selection night, we're going to get more impact, or more input from the screeners. So they participate in a round robin interview with 4 different interviewers, different questions. And they also do what we call a mock teacher introduction. Like, how would you introduce yourself to students on the first day of school? And that gives us an idea of how they structure just not a lesson because they're not necessarily prepared for that, but how do they communicate with a group of people? How do they share information? And so if they don't interview as well, maybe they're really going to rock that teacher introduction. And that tells us something about, what they're going to be like in front of students. And they also submit an essay for us for St. Thomas talking about the missions of the two, of St. Thomas and Minneapolis Public Schools, so we can read a little bit more about their history. And from there, we actually have like a rubric where we put numbers in and everything. But then we look at the person individually as well. So that rubric helps us look at like who's jumping out on top. But we want to know, we know there can be bias. So many folks see a teacher as a white female. And as much as there's a need and a desire to diversify the profession, we know that we still all have that bias built in with us. So Shelley and I take the time to really go through all that documentation and read about these candidates and ultimately decide on the top 15 to 20, which is hard because we've had a lot of great candidates. And one of the nice things is that they can apply again. And we definitely have had folks who applied and didn't get in the first time, but they apply again and they get in the second time, So we know we've got more than 15 to 20 great teachers, but we have to, come up with something to stick within that number. And so it's been successful so far. We've gotten a lot of great people, and we make little tweaks regularly, but that's our process for recruiting and selecting.
Right. And I know that this process, like you said, it is aiming to recruit those diverse and bilingual candidates. Partially, I know in part because the funding requires that for some of it. But how have you seen those efforts strengthen your district's workforce? Like, what's been the impact?
Well, I think we all know that, there's been different studies that say if students have a teacher of color in elementary school, they're more likely to be successful throughout the rest of their career. And the idea of seeing somebody that looks like them and having more teachers of color in front of the classroom, as opposed to just being, and I don't want to say just because our education assistants are huge in supporting our students, but to see somebody really at the front of the classroom, that position of authority that we always look at with the licensed teacher, to see someone who looks like them potentially is empowering to know that's a possibility. Whereas also seeing somebody that looks different than them, or seeing a variety of teachers in leadership positions across the school, everybody gains from that. And now that our schools are seeing some more of that, I think, and we're still pretty early, but I think one of the things that we're trying to do is show our students that they can become teachers as well. And Minneapolis is doing some work with high schoolers as well to get them into the idea of education and how they could make a difference. And I think ideally what we're hoping is that these high school future educators, we're calling them, will make their way potentially into the residency where we can help get them into teaching positions. So it's really trying to create a through line to show that they can be a teacher, that school can be a positive thing, and they have the ability to use their own experience to create an even better classroom than they may have experienced as a student. So we're seeing a lot of positivity. There's still numbers that need to be growing, but I think we went from, over the past few years, Minneapolis has gone from about 18% licensed teachers of color to over 20% licensed teachers of color, which is still not as big as we want, but we are seeing a consistent growth in the numbers. And I imagine it's only positive things that are resulting from that.
Of course. And I know we've talked a little bit again about this retention, but in your own words, for both of you, I'd like to hear from a retention standpoint, why is this teacher residency program important?
Well, I would say that I think I mentioned before that residency programs have shown to be more effective at retaining teachers. And I think a big part of it is because they have that full year experience. And it's different if you do a more traditional program and that you take a couple years of classes and then you go in for 12 weeks and student teach. That gives you just a little taste of what teaching is like. Some folks, they realize it's not for them when they're supposed to do more than 12, once they have their own classroom. But the National Center for Teacher Residencies has been a great resource for us because they've done a lot of that research with so many different residencies that they've worked with throughout the country. And we, as Shelley mentioned, our retention rates are really up there. And I think what we can mostly point to is the fact that they have that full year experience. And I think also that cohort model and the fact that Minneapolis and St. Thomas, primarily, me and Shelley, we're working together so closely to fully support them throughout the program and then also when they graduate, because we don't want them to just kind of like, you did the program, you're done, go off and be a teacher. We want to continue that level of support. And St. Thomas has recently got the opportunity to invest in another staff member to help with that because it is hard. I mean, for Minneapolis, I am the residency person, and as one person, it can be challenging to try to hit everybody. But St. Thomas is such an investment in it as well that they were able to hire someone to help with that process. Faria is our newest St. Thomas's newest staff member, and she started some great things to help support our graduates to keep them in the classrooms.
I think the other piece that I will add, and this is more from a special education perspective, is that we know that many individuals who go into special education go in without a full teaching license, that they go in under emergency or variance. In Minnesota, we call it either a tier 1 or a tier 2. And so while we have our students that need the most effective educators, and they're getting the educators that are least prepared to teach students. So whether it be instructional strategies, social emotional behavior support, communicating and collaborating with families and other related service providers, as well as I don't want to call it paperwork because it's so much more than paperwork, but the documentation that helps us to provide services for students can be pretty technical and very, very important. And so special education has oftentimes hired individuals that aren't prepared. And what our residency model does, and I think this relates so directly to the retention piece, is it gives those special education residents an opportunity for preparation. So they get the opportunity for the coursework, the similar coursework that any other program would have, meets the standards that the state has for all teachers. And at the same time, we are focused on the practice of teaching because they have that year-long residency experience. The practice of teaching is at the forefront, and with their mentor teacher and the university supervisor, and the coursework wraps around that. So they're learning in courses, they're working with students, they're applying things with students, they're getting feedback, they're deepening their learning over time. And because of that preparation, and the data would support this, they're more likely to stay in teaching versus coming in under emergency, maybe not even finishing a program and then going on to something else. And so I really, that's what got me excited about teacher residency, is that opportunity to have real important preparation before being the teacher of record.
They're
for the
really,
students.
truly, they're prepared for success. With that, we in education, that's what you're always talking about. Like, we prepare them for success, but they truly are in this case. They've got
and they don't know everything by any means, because teaching is such a complex, amazing profession that there's just no way that we'd be able to prepare them for everything, and we don't. And so, our data would show that most of the residents and their mentors report, and their principals report, that they are prepared, and they're probably more prepared than a traditional teacher because they've had that year. But they're still learning, right? They're still learning and growing as educators. And I think that's one of the things, teaching is probably the only profession that when you start as a brand new teacher, you have the exact same responsibilities as a 5-year veteran or a 10-year veteran. If you go into any other field, we'd never do that with a brand new employer. But that's what we expect of our first year teachers. So it's a big, it's a lot. And it's complex skills. It's not, you're not making a latte.
Well, so this has obviously been a win-win for both MPS and the university. So I'd love to hear if you can share any tips or best practices in developing a successful partnership like this that you might have or recommend to other K-12 or higher ed leaders thinking about launching a teacher residency program.
I think one of the reasons why our programs have been successful is that St. Thomas and Minneapolis work really closely together. So Shelley and I think if you look at our calendars, we're meeting regularly. And we've heard of other folks as we've connected with the National Center for Teacher Residencies that are working to create programs where, the district is working over here and the university is working over here, and they connect, every couple months or something like that. And that can be much more challenging because you miss out on what's happening. One group is paying much more attention, say the district, for example, and the university doesn't hear some of the challenges until a couple months later. That's when we can lose folks. That's when it can become too much. Shelley and I are in constant communication. We teach together. So we see the residents at minimum once a week, where if someone is struggling in the classroom, then Shelley knows about it. If someone's struggling in coursework, then I know about it. And the whole purpose of that is so that we can just wrap them in supports, because it is rigorous and it's difficult. And so I think one of the most important things, or one of the ways that a residency can be most successful, is if there's complete buy-in and true collaboration between all of the people that are involved, and having that shared vision, that shared mission. It's not two things, two different groups periodically getting together and saying, is it working? Is it working? Like, instead we say, is it working? No, it's not. Let's meet tomorrow and talk about what we're going to do differently to make sure that we're getting the residents what they need. So for me, I think that's, we have been asked to speak at some of the different conferences as well about the fact that our collaboration is so deep, and that's what has made our program be more successful. Shelley, do you have any other thoughts on why?
I think the only thing that I would add, I agree with everything that Channing just shared. And I think the one thing I would add is that investment piece that the district has invested in Channing as a full-time position to administer the residency program. And St. Thomas has invested in my faculty line. I had a full-time faculty line. I still have the full-time faculty line. And 50% of my line is dedicated to residency. So it's not an add-on that neither one of us have other jobs, and then we just fit in the residency on top as a in higher ed, we call it as a one course buyout or something like that. That would just be on top of everything else we do, that the district has invested and that the university has invested in the personnel so that we can partner and have those regular connections and meetings. I think the other thing, the co-teaching, so we have a class that it runs during the academic year, and it's just the first 90 minutes of it. They come to coursework one day a week. So they're in their teacher residency 4 days, and then one day a week they come to coursework. And they start their day in a course that Channing and I teach. And I do think that is also significant, not only for our partnership between Channing and I, but also the students, the residents see us as a partnership. So I think that's also, it seems like an easy thing to do. And it has been easy for us, but I think it's had a big impact on what we can do as partners.
Yeah, alignment that it is a priority and not a other duties as assigned situation, for sure. So before we leave, I want to say we always wrap things up in the same way. We end every podcast with the same question, and I'm going to ask each of you all, if you could wave a magic wand, what is one thing that you would fix in education? Whoever wants to take that first, go for it.
It would have to be a very powerful magic wand. In my opinion, I feel like we need to start from scratch. And I say that from the perspective of, I also teach the educational equity course for St. Thomas for the residents. And we talk a lot about how school systems were built, hundreds of years ago, and it was for white students, and it was created by white adults. And as our population has changed, as we have changed as a country, we're still following such a similar model, the sit in rows, or they changed it now to groups. So that's going to fix the issue. But it's a structure that's not built for all of our students that we have now. And so we talk a lot about what are the little steps that teachers can do to kind of open up their structure so that we can reach more students. But if I had that magic wand, it's almost, just like, could we start this from scratch? Could we build this around the population that we have now, knowing what does work and what doesn't? But just having the open mind, having the capacity to say, this isn't working as it should be. Let's try it again. Let's see what we can do to make it work. So again, big magic wand. You start from scratch, and that's changing more than one thing, obviously. But I do think, I think there's a revisioning that needs to happen.
It makes me think about kind of the abolitionist teaching movement around blowing things up and starting again from scratch. And I think there's so many ways we do education that isn't inclusive of all students and measuring learning in a way that's holistic. And that impacts students and families, but also the educators that they're in. And I part of me wonders, is that the right question to have? Is it really about fixing education? Or is it about elevating education, elevating teachers? How do we honor and value our individuals who choose teaching so that they can be effective? As we talk to people who pick education, their sense of purpose is so deep about why they want to be teachers and why they chose this and how they want to impact systems and how they want to change education. And I love that, and it's exciting for me to be part of their energy around that. And sometimes when they start teaching, their soul gets crushed because they're up against some of the barriers that they experienced as students that are still in our education system. And so I wonder if it's more about how do we elevate education, elevate teachers, honor our educators, the skills that they bring to the profession, all the things that are needed to be an effective teacher. I mean, it's such an amazing profession because you get to do so many different things and practice so many different skills. And every day sometimes feels like a new challenge. So it's an exciting, if you're up, it's an exciting profession to be part of. I don't think that we honor and value our educators in our society the way that we should. And that's at every level, whether it be the way they're compensated, the resources that they're provided, how we provide professional development, and how we not how we prepare teachers. That's definitely part of it, but also how we launch them in the teaching profession as a teacher of record. How can we do that in a way that maybe is similar to other industries where they do have an on-ramp and take on more responsibilities rather than have everything at once. So I guess that's what I would have to say about a magic wand. If I
Well,
had one.
I'd say in that regard, it sounds like as far as providing the on-ramp and preparing them, it sounds like you guys have the magic wand in Minneapolis. So I want to thank you guys so much for joining and for sharing all your insights. Again, this has been Channing Jones from Minneapolis Public Schools and Dr. Shelley Neilsen Gatti from the University of St. Thomas. If y'all liked what you heard today, please subscribe to our podcast, Productive Disruption, and share this episode with a friend or colleague who might be interested in getting into teaching. Thanks, and see you next time.
Thank you.